Hi there, I'm Andrew, you're watching ThatGamerAjax, and welcome to this week's episode where we are going to be discussing Veil of the Void's Mimic class. Now, Mimics are the absolute master of misdirection in the way that this game plays. They offer a lot of utility outside of combat, but when you are in combat, you definitely thrive on misdirection and confusion. It's one of the only classes that has access to the realm of reflection in the game, which really focuses on distorting all kinds of things between perceptions and time even. So, let's go ahead and dive right on into some of the strengths with this class, starting with the fact that this is one of the most defensive-oriented classes in the entire game. You focus primarily on using reactions, and you have access to these things called mimicry points, which allow you to have a lot of unique effects, such as if an enemy hits you, you're able to reflect the damage right back at them up to a certain point. You can reduce damage incoming to yourself. Eventually, you're able to kind of absorb damage from some of your allies. There's just a lot that you're able to do by being a very patient combatant. So make sure that you are focusing on this if you decide to play this kind of bard and monk hybrid, if you're wanting a little bit of a D&D analogy. Mimics also get additional reactions later in the game, which allows you to get more reactionary strikes, or you're able to start using more and more of those unique spells that we talked about a little bit earlier. As we mentioned in the intro, the Mimic is one of the only classes that has access to the realm of reflection, meaning that you can kind of tap into this very distortion-focused magic. You do have some innate spells that you get by playing this class, though one of your specializations a little bit later in the game focuses primarily on using these spells to much greater effect. Mimics are also one of the only judgment-based classes in the game. If you need a little bit more of a D&D analogy, judgment is the equivalent of wisdom for this game, so normally this means that you're going to be a little bit more perceptive than some of your allies. It also means that you get to start up on having determination points, which is a trait in the game that works a lot like inspiration, though you are able to use a lot more things for it. Mimics also have three very distinct specializations. You have the Chrono Dreamer, which focuses mainly on affecting time around you and your allies and even your enemies, so that way you're able to use more unique spells. The Delusionist focuses primarily on those reflection spells. You are able to start summoning copies of yourself, and you can swap places with them and make them explode at later times. And then you have the Imitator, which from a roleplay perspective is one of the more unique classes in the game, because you kind of etch on these masks, and when you put them on, it gives you traits of other classes. Now, this is one of the only ways that you're able to do this while still playing a Mimic, rather than having to do more of a traditional multi-class. Now, in terms of weaknesses, there are really only a couple that Mimics suffer from. One is the fact that this is a very complicated class. This is not one that I would be recommending to brand new players to Veil of the Void or tabletop games as a whole, though if you have experience playing other games such as Dungeons and Dragons and you're okay with managing a lot of different traits and spells and cooldowns, etc., this is a class that you might actually have a lot more fun with. This is also a class that is able to do a ton of things in and out of combat, so make sure that you are really starting to know what your skills do, when you can use them, and how they might be effective, and more than just the situation that you'd be thinking of. And lastly, the Mimic is primarily a close range fighter. As I mentioned earlier, this is more of a monk style class. You focus on using archaic weapons, which is really kind of simple. They don't do a whole lot of damage, but they usually have some very interesting effects associated with it. If you're wanting to use more ranged abilities or ranged weapons, you're going to have to make sure that you dedicate a little extra time and resources to be able to learn those skills. This is also a class that generally has a relatively low armor class. Your default is going to be around medium, meaning that something needs to roll 3 successes in order to hit you during combat, but you're able to start reducing some of that damage a little bit, and that actually gets to be a lot stronger later in the game. So in conclusion, Mimics are a very strong class. I know from personal experience that I've had one that has completely wrecked combat encounters that I have had just because of all this thing is able to do. That being said, it is complicated. You need to really make sure that you are reading on this class and work with your game master to make sure that you can really flesh this thing out and that you're using all of your abilities right. So I mentioned that this is a little bit of a hybrid between a monk and a bard in the way that they operate. So what are some other interesting combinations that you would like to see, or that you could even picture being in a sci-fi role-playing game? Why don't you go ahead and comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. I put out videos every week, and we are really just trying to dive into some of these other smaller tabletop games that aren't necessarily all D&D. So until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.